Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford. Before the jingle started today, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to this podcast and kind of apologise a little bit for some of the sound in the podcast, and I'll explain that in a minute. But my guest today is called Mark, and Mark is currently undertaking a massive expedition journey on his own. And Mark sent me an email a couple of weeks ago and just sort of said, Keith, I love your podcast. I listen to it all the time, which was great to hear because apart from a few people and my dad, I didn't think too many people listened to this podcast. And to find out that Mark was listening to it on this journey was actually quite nice, to be honest. But Mark was like, I would love to come on the podcast and tell people about my journey. Would you have me? And I was like, yeah, of course I'll have you. Because what Mark is doing is he's currently cycling 24,000 kilometers from Squamish in Canada, all the way down through America, through Central America, down South America to finish on Aconcagua. Now, what Mark's doing is an amazing feat. And it's going to take him around 20 months. And he's on this journey at the minute. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been trying to get this podcast recorded. But obviously, Wi-Fi hasn't been very good, or we've lost contact for a couple of days. And then he is now in Nicaragua. And we thought we had perfect Wi-Fi. And he was on this iconic surf beach in Nicaragua, which looked amazing. But it was quite windy. So during the podcast, you will hear at times where Mark is recording this from outside, a little bit of wind. I've tried to edit it out, but there is still a little bit in there. But I don't think it takes anything away from this episode. It is still an absolutely amazing story that Mark's got to tell. And this is only part one of the podcast, because we will be going back to chat with Mark at some point in the future for part two. But I just wanted, before we kicked off with the podcast, just to say our apologies for the wind noise, but we've been trying to get this podcast recorded for some weeks now, and I think it is such a great episode that we still wanted to get it out. So please enjoy the podcast and let me know what you think. Thanks very much.
Hello and welcome to the Bucketlister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
So let's introduce Mark, who I think is currently in Nicaragua. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, that's right. I'm in a little surf town called Popoyo.
Well, thank you ever so much for joining us on this journey. I am amazed at what you're undertaking with this. This is not an Everest base camp trek. For a lot of our listeners, they would think of maybe Aconcagua is on their bucket list and they want to go and do Aconcagua. But I think they would take a much easier journey to get there than you're currently taking, Mark.
Yeah, I think most people would. This will take me probably about 20 months to get down there. And when you mentioned, I'll be biking all the way down, yeah, for the most part, I'll be biking. But what few people know, even well-traveled people, is that there's actually no road that connects Panama to Colombia. Not sure if you're aware of that yourself.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, so there's actually a bridge over the Panama Canal, and then the highway continues for about another couple hundred kilometers, and then it completely stops. And there's a massive area called the Darien Gap. And surprisingly, most people don't know this, and there's never actually been a road that connects those countries. So when I get to Panama, I'll actually stash my bike. And I've got a friend flying in with a couple kayaks from our sponsors. And we're going to kayak about 700 to 800 kilometers from Panama all the way to Colombia, through the Caribbean Sea, through the San Blas Islands, trying to avoid everything in the jungles there, the pumas, the saltwater crocodiles, the poisonous spiders, snakes, and of course the cartel, to get to Colombia before I can continue by bicycle again. So it's actually adds a whole nother adventure to the expedition.
Right, I suppose let's just start off then with what is your background in the first instance, and then where did this crazy idea come from?
Yeah, I've been doing kind of these expeditions and really long distance endurance stuff for quite a few years now. I started off years ago as I got into a sport called adventure racing. I started doing these multi-sport races that are sort of 6 hours long, and it combines mountain biking, kayaking, running, and generally sometimes climbing or various other sports. And got hooked on that. And within a very short time, I started doing races that were 12 hours, and then getting into races that were 24 hours and 36 hours. And then that turned into doing some races that were actually multiple days, going several days, and eventually getting into the Adventure Racing World Series. And these races go even longer. With the last one I did called Eco Challenge, World's Toughest Race. You can watch. There's 10 one-hour episodes on Amazon Prime. And so that race was a combination of sailing, jungle trekking, running, mountain biking, outrigger, ocean canoeing, whitewater rafting, and that was held in Fiji. And so the concept was you have 10 days to finish the race. And from the time you start until you stop, you have 10 full days. The clock doesn't stop. You sleep as little as possible. Usually it's when you start hallucinating, you'll kind of want to take a nap for a couple of hours. And after that, I started doing some shorter expeditions on my own. And the last one I did was kind of a precursor to this, which was a 17-day expedition of going by bike and pack raft and climbing the highest and the most iconic peaks in the area I live, between Vancouver and Whistler. And then that kind of led to this big dream trip, trying to do a massive human-powered expedition that goes through different countries and it is at least a year long. And that's where the dream sort of started.
And the eco race, that was to do with our very own in the UK, because most of our listeners are from the UK, but that was involving Bear Grylls with the eco race, wasn't it?
Yeah. Bear Grylls hosted that race, and he was down there for the whole time with us. Yes.
So people go and check that out on Amazon Prime. I watched the introduction to it and started watching one of the first episodes, and it's gone onto my list of things to watch because it just looks absolutely crazy. And how did you get on in that race in the end? Obviously, I haven't watched it yet, so I don't know the results, but you can let our listeners know. How did you finish in that one?
Yeah, we did all right. I mean, there was about 70 teams that took part from around the world. Probably 20 of the top adventure racing teams in the world were there. And we're Team Atlas, a Canadian team, and we finished 13th.
Very well done for that. Because, yeah, I mean, looking at the state of some of the people on the video introduction halfway through, I think there was definitely a lot of sleep deprivation happening during those 10 days.
Oh yeah, I remember it was I think our second night during the race. We were doing a stand-up paddleboarding section, and we are just way too sleepy to stand, so we're just kind of sitting and paddling. These are backpacks as a backrest. I just could not keep my eyes open, and at some point my eyes just closed and I fell asleep, and I fell into the ocean, and that's what woke me up.
So what then made you, how did you come up with this challenge? Obviously, like you said, you wanted to do something that was over a year long, that was human powered, but what made you put this challenge together as it stands?
Yeah, initially I was kind of like looking at just doing something really long. Then I looked at the idea of potentially going all the way around the world by human power. I started thinking more about that, whether I actually want to be away from community, civilization, friends for 5 to 7 years. And so I decided to start with something like this. I decided to make my destination the highest peak in the Americas, which is Aconcagua. And then I started thinking, wow, wonder if I can bike down. And that's when I found out about the Darien Gap. So I realized, oh, this is going to be tough. I'm actually going to have to kayak probably like an entire month. And then I started thinking even more. It's like, how can I add another huge personal challenge? So then I'm like, what if I climb the highest peak in every single country on the way to Aconcagua in preparation for Aconcagua? Because this is something I'm actually not sure if I can accomplish. And so it added like a whole nother level of personal challenge. And once I started putting all that together, then there was the whole other concept of like, is that even possible? Do the climbing seasons line up? And if the climbing seasons line up, can I get to each of these countries by bicycle within that time frame to climb these mountains? So I had to start kind of like looking at the different mountains. What are they? Where are they in these countries? Can you get there by human power? What are the climbing seasons? How far apart are they? And then start mapping everything out and seeing if it's actually even feasible. When I realized it is actually feasible is when I got really, really excited about it. But just because it's feasible doesn't mean you can actually pull it off. As you probably know, like many people go to Aconcagua and fly in there, have an entire team, guides, everything, and many times they're unsuccessful just because of weather. Where I'm trying to line up basically 20 months of expedition and the highest peak in every country, everything has to work out all the time for 20 months straight. So it's a major undertaking.
So when did you? So from the time of concept, how long was it then before you actually set up on your bike and started it?
Probably, say it was at least 3 years, probably. Because at first it was just a wild dream, like a bucket list dream, and it was just so big and so wild that I didn't even tell people about it at first. Then I started sharing with close friends. Then I started mapping it out and putting all these bucket list ideas all over my wall. And then even then, you still have to really think about, because it's not just doing a trip. It's not just going away for 3 or 4 weeks. It's a complete life change. I had to really think about, do I want to give up my business? Because you can't just kind of put it on hold for 20 months. Am I ready to give up relationships? Am I ready to give up my friend group? Am I ready to give up my entire community, everything that I'm used to having around me? And so these thoughts and go through your mind for months, really, to think about this, because it is just so long.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Is, you know, you are going through communities, you are meeting different people every time you stop somewhere, but for the majority of the time, you're in your own headspace.
Yeah, and the majority of the time, you're completely on your own. It's much different than, for example, traveling like backpacking or something, where you go from sort of backpacking town to backpacking town, where, you know, there's other tourists. You know, on a bicycle, you can only go so far every day. So for the most part, you're in very remote areas, in communities where there is zero tourists for them almost all the time. Mostly completely on your own. And the people you do meet, it's different, because you get to share like a few hours, maybe a day or two, but then you're back to being on your own again. Like, you completely lose a sense of community. And so after a while, I mean, the physical aspect is one thing, but that's such a small part of this. It's primarily it's a mental race. It's a mental challenge. Like, it's being out here on your own. I've been out here for 7.5 months now. It starts to wear on you. You start to really think and regularly, is this worth it? Is this really what I want to be doing? Am I ready to keep going for another year? Because it's January now, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to finish this year. I hope to finish in December, but it could easily spill into January or even February of next year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you say, that's your period for climbing Aconcagua, isn't it? December to February. So you've kind of got that. You've got a 3-month gap there to aim for the finish at that point. How much kit, Mark, are you actually carrying? Because obviously, sometimes you're going to be staying in a tent. Sometimes I assume you can stay in a hotel or a guest house or a bed and breakfast kind of place. But, you know, how much weight are you physically carrying on that bike?
To be honest, I haven't weighed the bike, but if I had to guess, I would say it's somewhere at least 40 to 50 kilo, probably, including the bike and all the gear. And right, like, I'm going through areas where it's extremely hot. Like, I was going through the desert this summer, so I need almost no clothes. But then when you get to climb a mountain called Pico de Orizaba in Mexico, I mean, believe it or not, but that's actually the 3rd highest peak in all of North America. And most people aren't aware of that, just after Denali up in Alaska and Logan up in northern Canada. So then, yeah, you need your Gore-Tex pants, your Gore-Tex jacket, your puffy, other had my crampons, my ice axe that I bike with from Canada. So all the gear adds up. I've got a 3-person tent. Yeah, sometimes you can stay in hotels or hostels or in a church or anywhere, but other times you got to be prepared to sleep outside, under bridges. I've slept just about everywhere.
And in terms of how do you fund an expedition like this? Like, how do you even start with planning a 20-month trip like this?
Yeah, I guess that's the next part when I was mentioning before about giving everything up back home. Another question that was going through my mind is, when I closed down my business, for one, I'm cut off from all income. And then the next part is, am I ready to spend my entire life savings to do this? So I've got just a little bit of sponsorship, but for the most part, I'm self-funding it for now. I'm using all my savings that I've saved up for years. I also have a house back home, which I'm lucky enough to have, and it's being rented out. And I was hoping to have an income from that. But as I was planning this, and last year, as you're probably aware, and the rest of the world, with these interest rate hikes, I went from being ahead, I was hoping to have about $1,500 a month of income to not having any additional income from that. But I also knew that the timing would never be right. There would never be anything that lines up perfect to do this. So I decided to go anyway. But it's still a tough one right now. I'm still thinking about it all the time. I don't feel I have enough funds to finish the expedition, so I'm constantly looking for more sponsorship.
Yeah, that's always anyone that comes up with these crazy ideas, like it is a big problem, isn't it? And it's one thing that, if you wait until it's going to be the right time, that probably is never going to arrive. Like, you've kind of got to make a start and work out how you're going to do it afterwards, I think.
I think so too. And part of my thoughts and theory was, when you approach some people about an expedition this big, it's not the same as going away for 3 or 4 weeks. Most people think you're insane and that there's no way you're going to pull it off. And so part of my theory is, after getting a lot of no's about that, is I'm just going to start. I'm going to go out there on my own. And once I'm 6, 8, 10, 12 months in, I can reach out to these people again and be like, look, I'm 100% doing this. Do you want to be involved now? I'm halfway through. I'm not giving up. I'm out here. I'm doing it. That's kind of my theory, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right attitude to have. And like, I am in awe of, to think about stopping your life for that amount of time and taking on a challenge like this. I think we could all sit there and go, wow, what an achievement. And obviously you've still got a long way to go, but listening to you, I think, your headspace is in the right space to go and do it. Like, you've got that goal at the end, and there is a massive goal at the end in climbing Aconcagua. Like, I didn't know about the kayaking bit. And I think, like, once you've ticked that bit, I think that's having to go through that. Like, why would you turn back once you've done that bit? Like, that bit is such a big part of it to actually get ticked off and done. I suppose, like, in terms of the trip itself, are you doing any of it with anyone else, or are you doing it also? Obviously, you said you were going to do the kayaking bit, or are you still doing the kayaking bit on your own? You said a friend was going to join you, but is he just dropping the kayaks off, or are you actually going to be doing kayaking with them?
Yes, so far I've been on my own almost the entire 7.5 months. I had one friend, she climbed the Orizaba with me, which was really nice. There's an old adventure racing friend. And yeah, I've got my friend Frank Wolf. He's flying in March to meet me in Panama, and we're going to do the kayaking section together. But after that, as far as I can see or know, I'll just be doing everything solo again, including all the climbs, except potentially in Ecuador, where I believe it's mandatory to hire guides for Chimborazo. But wherever I can, I'll be trying to do everything solo.
It's an absolutely amazing idea and an amazing journey. And I mean, in terms of so far, like you said, you've been on the road for 7 months. Like, have those 7 months been been without problems, or have you had issues on the way, as generally happens on an expedition?
Oh yeah, for sure. I've had some issues. I mean, it actually started. One of the hardest things was going through the deserts of South California and Arizona during July and August. Not only are they the hottest places in America, but they had the hottest summer in history and a historic heat wave at the same time. So for about a month straight, I was cycling all day. It was between 40 Celsius and 47 Celsius. It was extremely difficult to get through. And after that, when I got into Mexico, it was still hot. I had several incidents in Mexico. I had 2 attempted robberies on me, and I watched another robbery as well. And so when you have a couple attempted robberies on you, you're kind of cycling in fear a lot. Like, as the first one, for example, I was at this gas station. It was like 8 o'clock at night, so it was already dark there. I was desperately trying to find somewhere to camp for hours. I just couldn't find anywhere that I would think was safe to camp. So I ended up stopping at this gas station because of a thunder and lightning storm. And this guy came over and kept hassling me. I just wanted him out of there. And then he came back and he pointed down at his hoodie. And all I could see is, like, you've got that pouch at the front of a hoodie. I could see just something pointy sticking through it. And so initially I thought, this guy's pointing a gun at me. And then he pulled out this massive knife. I was like, oh my God, and tried to steal my bags and stuff. I screamed. Thank goodness there's a couple other guys at this gas station that kind of came over, at least had a look. But things like that are extremely scary. It's so much different than some people, like, you get all these comments after, like, I would have done this, I would have done that. But it's not a movie. Like, this is real life. And some of these people don't have anything to lose. And they're not afraid to stab you or to kill you or whatever it may be. And it can be pretty terrifying. I had a couple of scary situations in going through Mexico. But the last few countries, I mean, they've actually been amazing. Some of the most friendliest people I've ever met in my life. And I had so many people even warn me about Honduras for some reason. And I get it. I also read many things about how dangerous Honduras is. But again, just from experience now, I can, like, from my own experience, at least I can say they were some of the friendliest people I've ever met. They were all amazing. I had people pull over, like, offer me water. I had one guy give me a bit of money for a hotel room that night. I was trying to refuse, but he insisted and interviewed me for his YouTube channel. I just had an amazing hospitality with almost everyone I've met, aside from a few really bad incidents.
And what's so far in the journey then, can you pick out, like, a highlight that's literally just, like, blown you away that you just weren't expecting?
Yes, actually, climbing Pico de Orizaba was actually an amazing highlight. It's you're in this country, like, almost inside. I mean, it is still part of North America, but you think that there's no big peaks there. And then you learn about this mountain that's like 5,000, 600 or 700 meters tall. And it's got a glacier and snow on it 12 months of the year. It was just an amazing experience. And to share with a friend was also really cool too. And when I got there, there's all these guides and other groups of climbers and stuff wearing all this gear. They had all their climbing gear, helmets, mountaineering boots and everything. So it also made me feel like a bit nervous because I showed up there in running shoes, aluminum crampons, and aluminum ice axe. Just didn't have the space to carry all the gear. And I also felt like I could move a lot quicker with that. But succeeding with just minimal gear up there too, it's not something I recommend to most people, almost to anyone. You do need to have a lot of experience previously and definitely a high level of fitness to do something like that. But it was amazing to just climb that mountain with minimal gear.
And like, have you got like one thing, like, looking forward onto the trip? Obviously finishing will be the ultimate highlight, but do you have one thing that you're really looking forward to?
Yeah, I feel like I have, like, each country's got their own special thing, but right now I'm really looking forward to this kayak section and sharing it with Frank. We don't know each other too well yet. We'll get to know each other really well, but he is someone that I've looked up to for quite a while and kind of an idol for me in the adventure race or in the adventuring space. So to be able to share this experience with him and just having that, I can't even find kind of any stories about people paddling that entire section. So just the unknowns there and sharing it with someone will be something I really look forward to. Just having some friendship around for a few weeks will be really nice.
When you're on the trip now, Mark, do you, I mean, like, we came on, and we're doing this on a video conferencing call. Like, I'm sat in Devon in my office. It actually is blue sky today. Mark is sat under a bamboo roof on a beach in Nicaragua with like, looks like the most perfect surf. And obviously we apologize if you can hear a little bit of the wind blowing and stuff, but we are having to record it when Mark can actually get some Wi-Fi service. And there we go again. But Mark, do you ever get to somewhere and think, I'm going to stay here for 2 or 3 days and just chill out because this place is amazing? Or are you like being really regimented in moving every day?
No, yeah, it's exactly what I do. I have certain days where I have to be in certain places, especially with the climbing seasons. With the paddle in Panama, I have a permit for Chiripo in Costa Rica for February 22nd. They sell out quite early in the season. So there's certain times I have to be in certain places, but for the most part, I am flexible. And so I'll get to towns where I'm like, oh, I do not want to be here, or this place feels very unsafe, or I can't see myself staying here more than a night. And for the most part, I'm cycling most days. But when I get to a place that I'm like, oh, I like this place, then I'm definitely happy to spend a few days or even a week there. I had my mom even fly into Guatemala and visit me unexpectedly. She messaged me one day, says, I have a ticket to Guatemala next week. So I stopped and spent 10 days at Lake Atitlan with her. Now I'm here in Popoyo. I'm going to probably spend about a week in this sort of area just to surf a bit and just get my arms going and start getting them ready for the kayaking section. I think that's important too, because I've done really no arm work for quite a while. Yeah, if I find places I like, then I am able to stay for a little bit.
And one question that when you asked me about coming onto the podcast, like, one thing that popped into my mind was, like, from your perspective, what is the point of this? What do you see the point of this as?
Well, for one, I started doing this trip quite selfishly. I wanted to do like a bucket list dream trip of mine. But my goal with this trip after is, one thing I really enjoy doing is speaking. And so as part of my sponsorships that I've been sending out is I try and trade off getting a little bit of sponsorship money and in return coming to speak at either organizations or companies about helping people understand what their dreams are and how to chase their wildest dreams. So my goal with this entire trip, beside my own selfish dream, which is happening now, is really everything that's going to happen after I finish. And that goal is to inspire people to chase their wildest dreams through a book I'm going to write and then through speaking to her.
And are you, obviously, it's much easier, I would imagine, to write the book as you're going because you're in the moment. Are you diarizing your trip? Are you videoing your trip? Like, are you putting all of those things in place as you're on the trip now?
Yeah, all the time, especially when I get a chance to stop somewhere for a few days. Because some nights when I bike all day and you do like 100 and some kilometers and on a really heavy bike and you got tons of elevation, by the time you get somewhere and find a place to sleep and eat dinner, you just want to pass out. But whenever I stop, I'm writing all the time, keeping track of every single day, keep track of my kilometers, all the things that have happened. I've been writing a lot. And also I'm filming every single day.
How many memory cards have you gone through already then?
I've been sending hard drives back home. I've got another hard drive coming to Costa Rica next week and backing things up on my laptop. And I've got my phone. I had 2 GoPros, but I lost one on a cliff jumping incident. And I've got a drone as well. But and I keep several memory cards. Unfortunately, the drone right now I had to ship to Costa Rica, which I'm glad I did because drones are illegal in Nicaragua, actually. And many people don't know that. So if there's any listeners coming to Nicaragua with a drone, don't bring it. They'll search absolutely everything and take your drone away. They are very, very strict on it here.
And just if you're heading down to Peru as well, just make sure you're aware of that in Peru, because Peru's exactly the same. So if you're heading to Peru,
is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Peru's exactly the same.
I mean, I'm definitely going through Peru. Okay.
Yeah, I always remember the first time I ever went to Peru and was going through customs. They opened this door and you just saw DJI boxes in this room where they had just confiscated people's drones in Lima Airport. So yeah, just double check that one before you head down there.
Okay, that's a good tip.
Well, Mark, I think we should call this podcast part 1, because I would really like to have you back on again in what will probably now be 2025, and actually speak to you again once you've achieved your dream and done the trip, and we can all kind of find out how the other half of the expedition actually went.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. Yeah, I've got about a year more to go, and then we can reconnect again.
Yeah, well, we've got our 2025 Aconcagua trip happening in the beginning of January in 2025. So, dates might line up that actually you've managed to complete it, and our bucket list group and you could be on the mountain at the same time. I think that would be quite cool.
There's a very real possibility of that, because Ojo de Salado in Chile, I mean, the season's pretty similar to Aconcagua. So I may have to stall a bit of time there, and then I still have to bike from Chile all the way to Argentina. So I would like to finish this year, but there's a very good chance it's in January of next year. So
yeah, I think we're right. We're right at the beginning of January, so there's a chance that, if you do just delay it by a few weeks and get held up, then we could catch you up down there as well. But I know as soon as you finished, you're going to definitely be super busy with your speaking commitments and everything else. And I know your plan is to get a film out about the whole trip, which I would be super excited to see, and I'm sure everybody else listening would. But it would be great, like I said, to get you back onto the podcast once you've finished, and we can hear all about it, and actually people can find out if you completed it at all. Mark, where can people follow you on this journey? If any of the listeners are listening, is there a way of seeing how you're getting on? Like, you Instagram, Facebook, where can people sort of find out about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, most of it I post on Instagram. I make little videos on there. I usually try and keep it a few weeks behind for my own safety, so that nobody really knows where I am. You can find me on Instagram. That's probably best for now. It's Supermarks with an S _adventures. So SUPERMARKS
Well, perfect. I will put a link to that into the show notes. So if you want to follow Mark's journey and see how he's getting on, then you can follow him here. I'm sure with me, you'd like to wish Mark super good luck on the rest of your journey. And if people are listening like me, I'm sure they'll be keeping an eye on how you're getting on and following you. But from us at the Bucketlist Company, super good luck with this, Mark. It is an amazing expedition, and one that a lot of people wouldn't even think about, but many might dream about doing such a trip like this. But good luck with it anyway.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, Keith, and keep your show rolling too. It gives me something to listen to on the road. I listen to podcasts all day long when I'm biking, so I appreciate your show. And thanks so much. And if anyone does reach out to me on Instagram, feel free to shoot me a message. I'm happy to chat to anyone.
Well, I think, like you say, if you've got all of that time on your own, having some new friends to chat to you and say hello to you is probably quite welcome sometimes.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, I really do.
Well, everyone, hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. I mean, I found it super inspirational talking to Mark, and hopefully that you've been inspired by it as well. Obviously, maybe not to take on such of a challenge like Mark's currently doing, but I think if you've got your bucket list ideas in your head, then I think Mark gives people the inspiration to kind of just get on and get it done and start that process, because there is no day like today, and you can hold things off all of the time, but sometimes you just need to make that first step and book it or start it or take that first step, and that's what's going to get you onto your bucket list journey. So thanks ever so much for listening. I will be back with another episode next week, and obviously we hope to welcome Mark back onto the show in 2025 so we can hear all about his journey, and if he actually managed to get to the top of Aconcagua as well. So until next week, everyone, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.